I've been a detective for nearly a decade now, and I thought I'd seen it all. But nothing prepared me for the tangled web of morality and madness that unfolded in this case. My name's Sam Thorne, and it all started with a dead body, or more specifically, what was missing from it. The call came in early on a Tuesday morning. A routine surgery had turned fatal at Providence Memorial Hospital. The victim, Richard Green, a 45-year-old father of two, had gone in for a relatively simple gallbladder removal. By all accounts, the surgery was successful. But just hours later, he went into cardiac arrest and couldn't be revived. Something about the case didn't sit right with the attending nurse. She mentioned in her statement that Dr. Elijah Mercer, the lead surgeon, seemed strangely calm during the ordeal. Calm wasn't a crime, but the medical examiner's report raised my eyebrows. Green's heart and liver were missing. Hospitals are busy places, sure, but losing two major organs from a body? That's not a clerical error, that's a crime scene. I'd barely finished my second cup of coffee before I was on my way to the hospital. Dr. Mercer was a tall, charismatic man in his early 50s. His reputation preceded him, a renowned transplant surgeon with a laundry list of accolades and an air of quiet confidence. When I met him in his office, he didn't seem rattled. In fact, he seemed amused. "Detective Thorne," he said, shaking my hand firmly. "This must be a misunderstanding. We're talking about a tragic complication, not foul play. A tragic complication where two organs vanish into thin air." I countered, pulling out my notebook. "You'll forgive me if I'm not buying it, Doctor." He smiled, a practiced, polished expression that didn't reach his eyes. "I'm sure the pathology team will sort this out. Hospitals are chaotic environments. Detective. Mistakes happen. Mistakes. Right." But as I left his office, the words of the nurse stuck with me. Strangely calm. And Mercer? He was more than calm. He was confident. Too confident. By the time I got back to the precinct, the medical examiner had more for me. Turns out, Green's organs hadn't vanished. They'd been deliberately removed post-mortem with surgical precision. The cuts were clean, professional, the work of someone who knew exactly what they were doing. A search warrant for Mercer's office turned up nothing incriminating. His surgical records were spotless, his patient outcomes stellar. But something didn't add up. Over the next few weeks, I dug into Mercer's past. What I found was subtle but damning, a pattern of unexplained deaths during routine surgeries. Each patient's medical file was marked with the same innocuous note: unanticipated complications. The break came from an unlikely source, a whistleblower. Late one night, as I was drowning in paperwork, I got a call from a blocked number. A woman's voice, trembling but determined, said, "Dr. Mercer, he's not what he seems. Meet me at St. Luke's Chapel, 10 p.m. Come alone." I showed up early, parking my car under a flickering street lamp. The chapel was empty except for a lone figure seated in the last pew. She was young, mid-20s maybe, with tired eyes and a nervous energy that made her jump at every creak of the wooden floorboards. "Detective Thorne?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded. "You're the one who called?" She introduced herself as Clara Jennings, a surgical assistant who'd worked under Mercer for 3 years. According to her, Mercer was more than a gifted surgeon. He was the mastermind behind an illegal organ trafficking ring. Patients deemed expendable, the elderly, the terminally ill, those without strong social connections, were being sacrificed so their organs could be harvested and sold on the black market. "He says he's saving lives," Clara said, her voice cracking. He's convinced himself that he's doing the right thing. That these people, they're giving their lives for someone who deserves it more." The word "deserves" hit me like a punch to the gut. I pressed her for more details, but she broke down, sobbing into her hands. She agreed to provide documentation, emails, patient records, transaction logs, but she was terrified of what Mercer might do if he found out. The next morning, Clara was dead. Her car had been found wrapped around a tree on the outskirts of town. The coroner ruled it an accident, but I didn't buy it. Clara had been silenced, and I was more determined than ever to take Mercer down. The problem was, without her testimony or the evidence she'd promised, I had nothing solid to tie him to the crimes. And the deeper I dug, the more the moral complexity of the case began to gnaw at me. Mercer wasn't just lining his pockets. He was prioritizing patients who'd been denied transplants through legal channels. People who'd been told they had no chance at life were suddenly given new hope, at a cost. But at what point does saving a life become playing God? And who gets to decide who lives and who dies? I wrestled with those questions as the case unfolded, but there was no time for philosophical debates. People were dying, and Mercer's cold calculations, no matter how noble he claimed his intentions were, couldn't justify the blood on his hands. I needed leverage, and I needed it fast. Clara's death was a warning shot, and I wasn't naive enough to think I was untouchable. If Mercer suspected I was closing in, he wouldn't hesitate to come after me. A breakthrough came from an unexpected angle: the black market itself. I had a contact in the organized crime unit, Detective Lena Ortiz, who'd been tracking organ trafficking for years. When I filled her in on Mercer, she wasn't surprised. "There's always someone like him," she said grimly. "A surgeon with a god complex who thinks the ends justify the means." Ortiz had been monitoring encrypted communication channels used by traffickers. A new player had recently surfaced, using the alias Apollo. Their method of operation? High-quality organs delivered with alarming efficiency, bypassing the usual messy networks. Ortiz and I both knew it had to be Mercer. We set a trap. Ortiz posed as a desperate buyer with deep pockets, leveraging her undercover experience to arrange a meeting with one of Apollo's intermediaries. The plan was simple: follow the money, find the supplier, and connect the dots back to Mercer. The meeting took place in a seedy warehouse on the outskirts of town. Ortiz was wired, and a SWAT team was on standby. I waited in a surveillance van, heart pounding as she negotiated the deal. The intermediary, a wiry man with a thick accent and a scar running down his cheek, was cautious but ultimately agreed to the sale. When he handed over a flash drive containing details of the product, we had enough to move. The drive contained a chilling inventory: organs, donors, dates, and destinations. It was meticulous, clinical. And there, buried in the files, was Richard Green's name. His heart and liver had been shipped to a private hospital in Singapore 2 days after his death. The recipient, a billionaire tech mogul with a reputation for keeping his medical history under wraps. We raided Mercer's house that night. He answered the door in a crisp white shirt, as if he'd been expecting us. "Detective Thorne," he said, his voice steady. "I assume you have a warrant." I did. We turned his home upside down, and while he'd been careful to cover his tracks, no one's perfect. In his study, hidden behind a false panel in the wall, we found a ledger, handwritten notes detailing years of surgeries, transactions, and names. It was the smoking gun we needed. Mercer was arrested, but even as he was led away in handcuffs, he maintained his composure. "You think you're stopping a monster," he said, his voice calm and measured. "But how many lives have you condemned tonight, detective? How many will die waiting for an organ that will never come?" His words haunted me. The case was airtight, and Mercer was sentenced to life without parole. But his legacy lingered in the shadows of my mind. Families of the recipients hailed him as a hero, even as the families of the victims cursed his name. The moral weight of his actions hung over me like a storm cloud. Months later, I got a letter in the mail. No return address, just my name scrawled in neat, precise handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of paper with a short message: "You can stop me, but you can't stop the need. Someone will always fill the void." Mercer's empire might have crumbled, but his words were a reminder that the lines between good and evil are often blurred. The system is broken, and people like him exploit those cracks. I keep that letter in my desk drawer as a reminder. Justice isn't always black and white. And sometimes, the hardest cases are the ones that leave you questioning your own reflection.